My analogy on Caitlin Clark, in addition to her being a unicorn, I think the best analogy for her is Ronda Rousey, except Ronda Rousey in college. What happens now? Using my own experience, do you remember when Ronda Rousey was a viral superstar and everybody watched Ronda Rousey? I ordered multiple UFC fights on pay-per-view to watch Ronda Rousey fight. I can't even name a women's UFC fighter. That's not hyperbole. I can't name a women's UFC fighter right now. Adam is here with me who does fact-checking. Who is the women's, champion right now in the UFC? Do you know? What percentage? Here's a good question for you. What percentage of actual fans, I mean legitimate sports fans, can tell you right now who the women's UFC champion is? 5%? 10%? Some of you may know. I have no idea. It's not because I'm not interested in UFC. It's because, like a lot of you, I follow the big story. People want to be a part of the big story. About 70%, maybe higher, of the audience for women's UFC fights vanished when Ronda Rousey lost. I think that's going to happen in the UFC as well. I think that as soon as Ronda Rousey lost, most people stopped caring about UFC women's fighting. I think Caitlin Clark leaving and going from college to the WNBA is going to vanish the overall college basketball audience. And I think the debate's going to be, how do we create another Caitlin Clark? I think that's going to be a fascinating discussion. But I think the audience that really cares about NCAA women's basketball is small. I think the audience that cares about Caitlin Clark, to be fair, is more substantial than I thought it was going to be. I thought as long as Iowa's women's won, that there would be a substantial audience. I didn't think it would go all the way to, what did it go, 18.7 million, I think was the women's viewership. That's all Caitlin Clark. I think if Caitlin Clark had lost, there would have been 5 or 6 million people watching the women. And I think that's what it's likely to go back to next year. Now, the other question is this going to juice the WNBA? I think it depends on how good she is. If Caitlin Clark is orders of magnitude better than the average WNBA player, I think some people will follow her. I think the problem is we've had 25 years of the WNBA, and there is no fan base for any of these teams. And look, there are some success stories, minor level, in the National Women's Soccer League, the NWSL. Certainly the U.S. women's soccer team is very, very popular. It hasn't translated as much into the pro ranks because most people don't care about the NWSL. They'll cheer for the U.S. franchise, right? Which is why I think they should put Caitlin Clark on the women's college team at the Olympics. I think that's a no-brainer. Way more people will watch if they put her there. I just don't know that her success is going to translate to the WNBA. Now, maybe I'm wrong. It's going to stun you. Sometimes I'm wrong. I don't think it's going to translate. I think much of the Caitlin Clark interest was connected to Iowa, which already has a fan base, and to the women's college basketball, which already has a fan base, to be fair. UConn women, Tennessee women. They built Gino Auriemma, Pat Summitt. They built really big audiences that a lot of people didn't take note of. In fact, I don't even think this was the record viewership for a women's basketball game. I think the record viewership, if I'm not wrong, Adam, you can check this, was 1995. I think I'm correct in this, going all the way back to 1995, I think was the most watched women's basketball game ever. Maybe it was 1996. Caitlin Clark. Debut was boring. She had 10 turnovers, I believe. She only scored 20 points. The Indiana Fever, I think, is her team name, whatever it is. I'm curious to see how many people watched. My take on this in general is as follows. Ominous. People say, what do you mean? It was the first game. Yes, it was the first game. That's 100% correct. And she deserves the right and will have the right to get a lot better. And she will. Because she's going to have to learn how to adjust to the pace of play, adjust to speed, all those things. But Caitlin Clark didn't look like a top 5 player in the WNBA. Why does that matter? The only reason people are going to watch Caitlin Clark is if she's dominant. The reason people watched Iowa women's basketball was not because Caitlin Clark was one of the 25 best players in college basketball for women. It was because she was the best. If she's not a top 5 player in the WNBA, and right now she's not close to it, the amount of interest in the league is going to diminish in a hurry. The reason that she could bring an audience with her is because of her dominant play. That's what attracts people to watch. Women's college basketball has an ingrained fan base. There is no ingrained fan base at all for the WNBA, even though they've been playing now for whatever it is, 27 years. Interest in Caitlin Clark in the WNBA will turn into Linsanity. Remember Jeremy Lin when everybody cared about him for a short period of time, the Asian point guard? If she isn't a top 5 player, and if her team is not very good, both of which looked likely to be true in the first game of the season, if that is true, then there will be an immense lack of interest in Caitlin Clark, and the WNBA ratings and media attention are going to plummet in a hurry. Caitlin Clark has to be a top 5 player in the WNBA, and her team has to be good and win. If neither of those things are true, interest in Caitlin Clark is going to vanish, and it's going to vanish in a hurry. Now, it's only one game, and certainly, she scored 20 points, and she did have 10 turnovers. But if there isn't a lot of success in year one, the Caitlin Clark frenzy is going to turn into Linsanity. She has to be top 5 player in the WNBA eventually. She's not close to it right now. 2.1 million people watched. Not a lot. I understand the WNBA is trying to trumpet this. Oh, this is our biggest audience in 20 years or whatever. That ain't good. That is a bad, bad number. Why do I say that? 18.9 million people watched Caitlin Clark in the last basketball game that she played. Iowa women's against South Carolina women's basketball. 18.9 million people watched. Everybody's running around talking about what a star Caitlin Clark is. Women's college basketball has always had a big fan base. And Caitlin Clark tapped into that. 2.1 million were willing to watch her in the WNBA. 90% nearly, 85%, whatever the math is, of the people who watched Caitlin Clark in women's college basketball 2 months ago weren't willing to watch her play 6 weeks ago. Not even that long. What are we? Yeah, like 6 weeks ago. Weren't willing to watch her play in the first ever WNBA game. 2.3 million. Sorry, 2.3 million watched. Regardless, 85% of that audience basically vanishes. Why? I was told that Caitlin Clark was going to revolutionize the audience for the WNBA. No. Women's college basketball has fans. The WNBA doesn't. Even the most popular women's college basketball player of all time can't deliver audience for the WNBA. Food for thought. Maybe it's going to change. Certainly people will say, well, that was on ESPN2 and it was going head-to-head with. I get it. Yet nearly 19 million people watch her play a college basketball game. Nearly 90% of that audience wasn't willing to watch her play in the WNBA. That's trouble. She better be really, really good, or Caitlin Clark is going to be Linsanity, and everybody's going to be like, WNBA, it doesn't matter. But at least they get to fly on charter airplanes.